The door exploded, not just opened, but ruptured, the sound ripping through the suffocating quiet of the temple prison, tearing apart the fragile peace Marie Antoinette fought so desperately to maintain. Heavy boots thudded against cold stone, 6 figures flooding the room. Their faces, grim and unyielding, were illuminated by a single flickering lantern, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the damp walls. An order, a document clutched in a rigid hand. They had come for the boy. Marie Antoinette, her hand still resting protectively on 8-year-old Louis Charles's small chest, felt her heart lurch into her throat. He was her last tether, her final reason for enduring this living hell. 6 months had passed since her father, the king, was dragged to the guillotine. 6 months of constant fear, of holding her son close, never letting him out of her sight. Now they were here to rip him away.
A primal scream tore from her throat, raw and animalistic, utterly unlike the elegant pronouncements of a queen. She threw her body between the guards and her still sleeping child, a shield of flesh and bone against an army of men. She snatched Louis Charles, holding him so tight he woke, confused and whimpering in the sudden blinding light. His small cries fueled her fury, transforming her into a creature of pure instinct. "You will not take him," she shrieked, her voice tearing. "You will have to kill me first." The guards stood firm, their faces impassive. This wasn't random violence. It was meticulously planned, a cold, calculated strike against the very core of her being. They had watched her, these revolutionaries. They had observed the former queen, imprisoned for months, stripped of her crown, her freedom, her husband. They had noted her astonishing resilience, her refusal to break under starvation, humiliation, or the constant threat of death.
But they had also discovered her one true vulnerability, her children, her profound, boundless love for them. And now they intended to weaponize it. Physical torture might forge a martyr. Psychological torment, however, could create a shattered shell, leaving nothing but a husk behind. Marie Antoinette had changed. The frivolous queen was long gone. By 1793, she was a mother, heartbroken, having lost her oldest son, then her husband to the guillotine. She had already lost everything imaginable, her crown, her freedom, her country. The revolutionaries, however, were about to teach her that she could still lose more, far, far more. The temple was a suffocating fortress, designed to crush spirits. Dark, damp, and oppressive, it pressed in on them, a constant chilling reminder of their precarious existence. Marie Antoinette, in desperation, tried to conjure some semblance of normal life for her children within its grim walls.
But the guards were always there, omnipresent shadows, watching, reporting every detail to the Committee of Public Safety. They noticed her Achilles heel. She could withstand any personal hardship, but crumbled at the slightest danger to her children. So the psychological torture began, escalating slowly. Every interaction, every tender moment with her children was monitored, controlled. Her very privacy was invaded. Slowly, Marie Antoinette began to unravel. Her hair, once light brown, started to turn white from stress, a grim phenomenon now known as Marie Antoinette syndrome. She stopped eating. She developed severe internal hemorrhaging, which she tried desperately to conceal. But she clung on because she still had her children. They were her life raft. The revolutionaries knew they needed to snatch that raft away. July 3rd, 1793, the date seared into history as the beginning of her ultimate torment.
Around 10 o'clock that night, Marie Antoinette had just settled 8-year-old Louis Charles into bed. He slept in the same room, a precious, fragile presence she couldn't bear to lose sight of. Her daughter, Marie Therese, and sister-in-law, Madame Elisabeth, were in adjacent rooms. Then came the boots, the thudding on the tower stairs, drawing closer, heavier. The door, once again, violently crashed open. 6 municipal guards, led by a man brandishing an official decree. They had come to take Louis Charles. He was to be re-educated by the Republic, separated from his mother's corrupting influence. Marie Therese, recalling that night in her memoirs, described her mother's instantaneous transformation from composed despair to raw, untamed fury. Marie Antoinette launched herself between the guards and her sleeping son, clutching him, shaking him awake. Her screams weren't the objections of a former queen. They were the guttural cries of a mother protecting her young.
"You will not take him! He is just a child!" For 1 agonizing hour, 60 long minutes, she physically barricaded the doorway, holding her sobbing, terrified son, refusing to yield. The guards threatened her. They threatened the boy. They threatened her daughter. They vowed to use force to inflict pain. Marie Antoinette fought on, a desperate, fading flame. Finally, Madame Elisabeth, her voice choked with tears, begged her sister-in-law to stop. Louis Charles was hysterical, Marie Therese weeping uncontrollably, and the guards were growing increasingly violent. Her resistance, utterly exhausted, broke. She pressed a final, desperate kiss onto Louis Charles' tear-streaked face, whispering words that would forever remain unheard by history. Then, she watched, helpless, as 6 grown men tore her 8-year-old son from her arms and dragged him down the winding tower stairs. His terrified screams echoed, fading slowly into the oppressive, eternal silence of the prison.
She collapsed onto the floor, a broken heap, and did not move for hours. Her life raft was gone, her final tether severed. But the cruelty didn't end there. The revolutionaries didn't just take her son, they handed him to Antoine Simon, a radical cobbler hand-picked to destroy the boy. Louis Charles was imprisoned in a dark, windowless room. He was forced to wear a red revolutionary cap, to sing anti-monarchist songs, to curse his mother with vile names, to parrot accusations of treason and conspiracy. When he resisted, Simone beat him, starved him, kept him in agonizing isolation until the boy's spirit shattered. Within weeks, Louis Charles was repeating everything they told him to say, including monstrous, unspeakable accusations that would be used as a weapon against his mother. Marie Antoinette didn't know the gruesome details, but she knew her son was suffering, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, she could do to save him.
Her own journey into the abyss continued just weeks later. On August 1st, 1793, less than a month after her son was taken, guards burst into her cell at 2 in the morning. No explanation, no warning, just a curt order: "You're being transferred." They separated her from her daughter and sister-in-law. She begged for a final goodbye. They refused. She was dragged down the tower stairs, thrust into a carriage, and driven through the dark, silent streets of Paris to a place that held a name whispered with dread: the conciergerie. It was known as the antechamber to the guillotine. The carriage rattled through the pre-dawn darkness, a crude, unforgiving journey that ended not at a palace, but at the grim gates of the conciergerie. This was no ordinary prison. It was the final stop, the wretched waiting room for the guillotine. Marie Antoinette understood, with a chilling certainty, that she was not being moved, but prepared for death.
Upon arrival, her identity, her name, her very being was stripped away. She became prisoner number 280, not a queen, not even a woman, simply a number in a ledger of the condemned. Her cell was a suffocating rectangle, no more than 12 feet by 8 feet. The walls were damp stone, slick with mold, exuding the chill of a tomb. A thin straw mattress lay on the floor, a simple wooden table, 2 chairs, and a chamber pot comprised her entire world. A single candle provided the only light, struggling against the medieval dungeon's oppressive darkness. There were no windows, no glimpse of the outside world, just an endless, suffocating gloom. And then, the final, insidious twist, a privacy screen, a folding screen, offered as a gesture of humanity, so she could change clothes or use the chamber pot in solitude. It seemed, at first glance, a small mercy, but it was a cruel farce, a theatrical mockery of dignity.
Because inside that tiny cell, at all times, were 2 armed guards. They sat in the corner, unblinking, watching her every move. When she ate, when she slept, when she changed behind that useless screen, when she used the chamber pot, when she prayed, when she cried. Constant, relentless, unblinking surveillance. This was not about security. She was a 37-year-old woman in failing health, trapped in a stone box. This was psychological torture, designed to peel away the last shreds of her privacy, her humanity. Historical accounts speak of her composure, her attempts to retain some semblance of her former self. She would sit for hours, staring at the mold-stained walls, her face a blank mask. The guards reported that she barely spoke, barely moved, barely ate. But at night, when the single candle flickered low, when she thought the darkness might hide her, they heard her. Soft sobs, the whisper of a name repeated over and over. Louis Charles, Louis Charles.
Her stolen son, a ghost haunting her waking and sleeping hours. Her body, under the relentless assault of stress and grief, began to betray her. She suffered severe hemorrhaging, likely uterine cancer, or a brutal consequence of her torment. She bled through her clothes, a humiliation she was forced to endure in front of her unyielding captors, asking them for rags to staunch the flow. Her hair, now completely white, began to fall out in clumps. She was only 37, yet she appeared 60, a ghost of her former self, awaiting the inevitable. Then came the trial, October 14th, 1793, 8 in the morning. Marie Antoinette was dragged from her cell, not to a court of justice, but to the Revolutionary Tribunal. This wasn't a trial, it was a brutal performance, the verdict already sealed. The revolutionaries needed a spectacle, a public justification for her execution.
The courtroom overflowed with revolutionary officials, eager journalists, and citizens hungry for the humiliation of the former queen. Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, the prosecutor, stood ready to unleash a torrent of charges: treason, conspiracy, financial corruption. Marie Antoinette sat in the defendant's chair, pale and gaunt, dressed in widow's black. For 2 days they hurled accusations at her, conspiring with Austria, squandering France's treasury, plotting counter-revolutionary schemes. She met each charge with a startling composure, a quiet intelligence. She refuted false claims, admitted to mistakes without groveling, refusing to be broken, refusing to give them the satisfaction. So Fouquier-Tinville played his final, most venomous card. He called a witness, Jacques Hébert, a radical journalist. Hébert then repeated the monstrous accusations allegedly made by Marie Antoinette's 8-year-old son, Louis Charles.
The boy, under brutal coaching and coercion from his captors, had been forced to claim that his mother committed incest with him. Let that horrifying truth settle in for a moment. They accused her of sexually abusing her own child, using testimony extracted through torture from an 8-year-old boy in a public courtroom before hundreds of people. The room fell into a stunned silence. Even the bloodthirsty mob seemed momentarily shocked by the sheer depravity of the accusation. Marie Antoinette, who had remained stoic through every insult, every lie, every threat, shattered. She rose, her voice, which had been calm, now cracked with raw, visceral emotion. "I appeal to all the mothers present in this room," she cried, her eyes blazing, piercing the crowd. "Is there among you a single one who would not shudder at such an accusation?" She wasn't addressing the judges. She was speaking directly to the women in the crowd, mothers, daughters, sisters.
For the first time in the trial, she wasn't defending herself as a queen, but as a mother whose child had been weaponized against her. Nature itself refuses to respond to such a charge made against a mother, she continued, her voice resonating with pain and outrage. "I appeal to all mothers who are listening to me." The courtroom erupted. Some women who had come to jeer at her were moved to tears. Even some revolutionary officials shifted uncomfortably. It was too much, too cruel, too utterly devoid of humanity. But Fouquier Tinville cared nothing for human decency. He steamrolled through the remainder of the trial. At 4 o'clock in the morning on October 16th, after a trial lasting less than 2 days, with no real evidence, Marie Antoinette was found guilty of high treason and crimes against the state. The sentence? Death by guillotine. Execution scheduled for later that very same day. She was granted a few hours in her cell to prepare for death.
Back in her cell, with the first light of dawn painting the conciergeries' grim walls, and only hours separating her from death, Marie Antoinette was finally given a pen, paper, and ink. She didn't write a political manifesto. She didn't curse the revolution that had so brutally devoured her family and her life. She didn't beg for mercy, a concept alien to her captors. Instead, she wrote a letter, a final testament addressed to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, who remained imprisoned in the Temple with Marie Antoinette's daughter. It remains one of history's most heartbreaking documents. "It is to you, sister, that I write for the last time," she began, her words flowing onto the page with a quiet dignity. "I have just been condemned, not to a shameful death that is only for criminals, but to rejoin your brother, innocent like him. I hope to show the same firmness in my last moments." Her hand, perhaps trembling, continued.
"I am calm as one is when one's conscience reproaches one with nothing. I deeply regret having to abandon my poor children. You know that I lived only for them and for you, my good and tender sister." She poured out her final thoughts, forgiving her enemies, asking pardon for any wrongs she might have committed, and above all, begging her sister-in-law to care for her children. "May my son never forget his father's last words, which I expressly repeat to him. Let him never seek to avenge our death." Every ounce of her remaining love, her maternal devotion, her sisterly affection saturated that page. These were her final thoughts, not as a queen, but as a mother, a sister, a human being facing the unfathomable void. The letter filled 4 pages. She signed it simply, Marie Antoinette. Then, with an almost imperceptible gesture of grace, she handed it to a guard.
Here lies the devastating truth, another twist of the knife in a life already carved open by sorrow. The letter was never delivered. Her jailers intercepted it, a final act of petty cruelty, and it vanished into a revolutionary archive. Madame Elisabeth never read it. Her daughter, Marie Thérèse, never knew of its existence.
The letter wasn't discovered until decades later, long after everyone Marie Antoinette loved was dead. Her final, profound words to her family died in silence. October 16th, 1793, 11 o'clock in the morning. The executioner's assistant entered Marie Antoinette's cell, shattering the fragile peace of her last moments. He ordered her to prepare. Every step, every command was designed with a singular sadistic purpose: to strip away the final remnants of her identity, her dignity. First, the dress. She was wearing a simple black morning gown, the same she had worn since her husband's death, a symbol of her grief, her enduring love.
The guard ordered her to remove it and put on a plain white chemise, the uniform of the condemned. She asked to change in private. The guard refused. She had to undress in front of the same men who had been watching her for months, observing her every intimate moment, now witnessing her final public degradation. Second, the hair. Her hair, now entirely white and brittle from unimaginable stress, was crudely hacked off with shears. No ceremony, no care, just rough hands and sharp blades, savagely cutting away one of her last physical dignities. The tangled white strands fell to the damp stone floor, another piece of her discarded. Third, the binding. Her hands were tied tightly behind her back with coarse rope, so tight it cut into her wrists, a brutal, deliberate pain. She flinched, a quiet gasp escaping her lips, and said softly, "You did not bind my husband's hands like this." The guard, deaf to her quiet protest, ignored her.
At 11 o'clock, she was led out of the conciergerie, emerging from the suffocating darkness of her cell into the blinding daylight. 76 days she had spent in that tomb. The sudden sunlight pierced her eyes, making her wince. She expected a closed carriage, the small mercy her husband had been granted for his final journey. Instead, there was a rough, open wooden cart, a tumbril, the kind typically used to transport animal carcasses. She was forced to climb into the cart, to sit on a hard plank, her hands bound, utterly exposed to the entirety of Paris. As the cart lurched forward through the cobblestone streets, thousands of people lined the route, a roaring, seething mass of humanity. They screamed, jeered, spat, and threw garbage at her. One man, sitting at a window, sketched furiously. Jacques-Louis David, the revolutionary artist who had voted for her death.
His drawing survives, a haunting image, a thin, hollow-eyed woman sitting rigidly upright, her face a mask of grim dignity, even as the world howled for her blood. The journey to the Place de la Révolution took over an hour of public humiliation designed to destroy whatever remained of her spirit, to break her utterly before the blade fell. It didn't work. At 12:15 in the afternoon, the cart stopped at the foot of the guillotine. The crowd roared, a wave of savage delight. Marie Antoinette, her legs shaking slightly, but her head held high, climbed the steps of the scaffold without assistance. And then, in the final moment of her life, something extraordinary happened. As she walked toward the plank, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. She stopped. She turned to him, her eyes meeting his, and she spoke her last words, a quiet, almost bewildered apology. "Pardon me, sir. I did not mean to do it." An apology to the man about to kill her.
A bizarre, surreal act of courtesy, the final, ingrained reflex of a life lived under strict royal protocol. But it was more than that. It was a choice. In the face of absolute degradation, She chose grace. 20 seconds later, the blade fell. The French Revolution, in its furious zeal, yearned to obliterate Marie Antoinette, not merely the woman, but the very symbol she embodied, the Austrian, the wasteful queen, the lavish personification of royal excess. They subjected her to unimaginable psychological torture, a slow, methodical dismemberment of her spirit. They weaponized her own child against her, twisting pure maternal love into a tool for her destruction. They stripped her of every dignity, every comfort, every shred of privacy, determined to erase her entirely. And in the end, they failed, because in their obsessive quest to break the queen, they inadvertently revealed the human being beneath the caricature.
A mother who fought with every fiber of her being for her children. A woman who faced monstrous, unspeakable accusations with a profound, unwavering courage. A person who, even on the very steps of the guillotine, in the face of absolute annihilation, held on to her humanity with a grace that defied their cruelty. They desired her to be remembered as the widow Capet, a traitor deserving of every indignity. Instead, history remembers Marie Antoinette, a woman who endured 76 days of calculated barbarity and still found the inner fortitude to utter an apology to her executioner. That they could never take from her. That was her final, indelible triumph. Her journey from the gilded cages of Versailles to the damp stone of the Conciergerie was a tragic descent into the darkest corners of human experience.
Yet, within that descent, a different image of Marie Antoinette emerges, not the Madame Deficit of propaganda, but a figure of resilience, a testament to the enduring human spirit, even when confronted with absolute evil. The revolutionaries believed they were delivering justice, reshaping a nation through fire and blood. They sought to cleanse France of its past, to construct a new society free from the perceived corruption of monarchy. Their methods, however, exposed a chilling irony. In their pursuit of a purer future, they frequently engaged in acts of profound inhumanity, sacrificing individual dignity at the altar of an abstract ideal. The fate of Louis Charles, her 8-year-old son, remains a stark reminder of this brutal reality. Stripped of his identity, subjected to abuse and isolation, he became a casualty, not of his own actions, but of a revolution's insatiable hunger for control.
His cries, echoing through those prison walls, represented the countless innocent lives crushed by the machinery of radical change. His story is a powerful illustration of how easily power can corrupt and how quickly ideals can be twisted into instruments of terror. And Marie-Thérèse, her daughter, survived, but was forever scarred by the horrors she witnessed. She carried the weight of her family's tragedy, a living testament to the revolution's devastating impact. Her memoirs, though guarded, speak volumes of the psychological toll inflicted upon those caught in the maelstrom of history. Her quiet endurance in the face of such profound loss teaches us the profound strength required to rebuild a life when everything you knew has been shattered. The story of Marie Antoinette, therefore, is not merely a tale of a queen's fall.
It is a cautionary narrative about the dangerous allure of absolute power, the seductive nature of mass hysteria, and the devastating consequences when a society loses its moral compass. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, mercy, and the capacity for both extraordinary cruelty and remarkable grace within the human heart. History, in its relentless gaze, demands that we look beyond the simplified narratives, beyond the villain and the victim, to seek the complex, often contradictory truths that lie beneath. Marie Antoinette, Prisoner 280, stands as a reminder that even in the most extreme circumstances, the essence of humanity, its capacity for love, suffering, and quiet dignity, can never be fully extinguished. Her final apology, a flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness, compels us to consider the value of empathy, even for those we deem our enemies.
No reminds us that every individual, regardless of their station or the accusations leveled against them, possesses an inherent worth that should never be violated. So, when we reflect on her story, let us not simply see a queen or a traitor. Let us see a woman, a mother, who faced the ultimate test and in her final moments chose humanity over vengeance, grace over despair. This enduring lesson, etched in the annals of time, is perhaps the true legacy of her tragic fate.